Thank you for joining me on the journey. This is Completed Christianity. So welcome back. Another episode of Being Complete. And today is Shabbat, our validation of the law, commentary reading in Galatians. And let's jump right over and take a look at that. So here we go. Galatians chapter 4. And I say, for as long as the child is an heir, as long as the heir is a child, he is no different from a slave, though he is master of all, but is under guardians and trustees till the time prearranged by the Father. So this first couple of verses here is just an allegory about the child, and though he's an heir and master of all that his father has, that he's kept with guardians until the prearranged time by the Father. So this is just an allegory about Messiah and our adoption as sons under the sonship of the Messiah. So we also, when we were children, were under the elementary matters of the world, being enslaved. And so, again, these elementary matters, it's more than just the elements of the world, but the spirits that have insinuated themselves into the elements of the world, and that bears out later on. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So the elementary matters, these spirits that insinuated themselves into the elements of the world, and so these things, these elementary matters, they're the first things, the things that come first, and the things that are foundational. And in these foundations of the world, because Yah created this world, well, the evil spirits underneath the enemy, they want to be able to control this world, so they insinuate themselves into these. And we talked about this in the 4th episode of the Mark of the Beast series. So go back, watch the Mark of the Beast series. The 4th episode, we deal with that a little bit. So we also, when we were children, were under the elementary matters of the world, being enslaved. But when the completion of time came, the Mighty One sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under Torah. So under Torah, under the law, under law, this phrase doesn't mean that you keep the law. You're not under the law because you keep it. You're under the law because you break it. Just like any law of man, like we've talked about before with the speeding law. When you go out, you speed, a cop stops you, now you're under that law. So before when you kept the law, you were free from the law because the law had no bearing on you. So keeping it is freedom, breaking it is bondage. But the enemy has taught us religion that flips that 180 degrees, and it's wicked. So Messiah, he was not born he was not born in sin. He was born without sin, and so he was born underneath the law, whereas the punishments of the law could have come upon him, and there would have been no redemption for him or anybody. So he was born under the law, in the sense that the punishments of the law, the death that the law requires when you break it, could have come on him. But he kept it, and he remained through his life free from the law. Born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under Torah, under law, in order to receive the adoption of sons. So we were under Torah. We were under the punishments because we had broke it. He was under the threat of punishment if he broke it, but he never did, because he remained faithful to his father in his father's ways. And because you are sons, the Mighty One has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. So Abba means Father, so crying out, Father, Father. So the Spirit of the Son, the Messiah, comes into our hearts. He cries out to his Father, thus his Spirit in us cries out to the Father. So you're no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, also an heir of the Mighty One through Messiah. But then indeed, not knowing the Mighty One, you serve those by nature that are not mighty ones. And so he's talking to the Galatians here. The Galatians are pagan people, lived in a pagan land, and many of them were of the tribes of Israel that he speaks to. Many of them were in this state. They were of the tribes of Israel, but they had become pagans because the northern tribes, they're driven out of the land, taken by the Assyrians, assimilated into the nations, and became pagans. And so you're no longer a son, but also an heir of the Mighty One through Messiah. But then indeed, not knowing the Mighty One, you serve those by which nature are not mighty ones. But now, after you have known the Mighty One, or rather known by the Mighty One, how do you again turn to the weak and poor elementary matters to which you wish to be enslaved again? So this is again what he's talking about. Again, he mentioned this before, enslaved to these elementary matters, these spirits in the elements of the world, these heavenly bodies that insinuate themselves in. And so how you turn again to the weak and poor elementary matters. So backing up to 8 here again. So they were pagan people in a pagan land, and they served pagan mighty ones, by which the nature of them, he's saying they're not mighty ones, because they don't have real power like Yah does. But after they've known the Mighty One, or rather known by the Mighty One, so they became known by him, known of him. He's saying, how do you again turn back to these other spirits, these other idols? How are you again turning back to them, to which you wish to be enslaved again? You closely observe days and months and seasons and years, and we did a video on this, and so this is typically taught that, oh well, if you keep the Sabbath, you keep the feast days, then you're observing days and months and seasons and years. Well, that's not what Paul is saying here. Paul is talking about up here, verse 8. He's talking about that they serve their pagan idols, okay? And so these days and months and seasons and years are the days and months and seasons and years of their pagan idols, because even in pagan traditions, they had their days, they had their times, and they had their festivals, just like Yah does. So you closely observe days and months and seasons and years. These examples of these kind of things in our modern day that Paul would be concerned about are things like Christmas and Easter and other these holidays that aren't scriptural. Christmas is taken from a pagan festival, and it's had a whitewashed veneer of what seems to look like Christianity, or seems to look like the faith of Scripture whitewashed on top of it, but it's still profane. It's still not scriptural, and a lot of people can't accept that, but that's the truth of history, and it's not acceptable to the Father. So Christmas and Easter, also days like St. Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, and and uh, and then like Halloween. Halloween should be obvious, but for some reason these days it's not obvious to people who claim to be believers. You closely observe days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you, lest by any means I may have labored for you in vain. So they're going back to, because they were taught by the circumcision party that all they had to do to be saved according to the Creator, all they had to do is get circumcised, and that's it. You don't have to do all this faith stuff and obedience like Paul's talking about. You just get circumcised, you're fine. So, okay, we get circumcised. Well, then they start turning back to their pagan ways and pagan days. And so he says, I fear for you, lest by any means I've labored for you in vain. So he labored in the gospel to bring them to Messiah, and now they're turning to false messiahs. Brothers, I beg you to become as I am, because I am as you are. You did not wrong me at all. So he calls them brothers. They still recognize them that they're brothers, and that they need to come back to the right way, to the ways of the Father. And he says, I beg you to become as I am. And he is keeping the ways of the Father, and he is as they are, because he's a man just like they are. You come back to doing the ways of the Father as I am. And you didn't wrong me, you're wronging the Father. Do you know that through weakness of flesh I brought the good news to you before, and my trial which was in my flesh you did not despise or reject, but you received me as a messenger of the Mighty One, as Messiah Yeshua. So it's this weakness that he has in the flesh. Nobody knows what that is. Nobody, there's no resource. It's something that happened fluidly in voice. We don't have any text that anybody understands that. But the weakness and trial which was in my flesh you did not despise or reject. So he had something wrong with him when he came to them and when he preached to them. And I submit that it probably has something to do with one of these things. So he says, are they servants of Messiah? They being like the Jews, because he mentions, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they of Israel? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. So, they servants of Messiah? I speak beside myself. I am more. Okay, he's more of a servant. He's in labors much more, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths many times. So he's saying that he died many times. So he kept being put to death, and bringing him back to life. Like when they stoned him, it says they left him for dead. Well, there's no way to survive a stoning. That just doesn't happen. So 5 times I received from the Yahudim, Jews, 40 stripes, less 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked, a day and a night, and I've been in the deep, in many travels, and dangers of waters, dangers of robbers, dangers of my own race, dangers from the nations, dangers in the city, dangers in the deserts, dangers in the sea, and among false brethren. So in toil, in hardship, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, and fastings often, in cold and nakedness, besides the matters outside, that what comes upon me daily, for the anxiety or care for all the assemblies. So this over here, this weakness in his flesh, this trial in his flesh, probably came from one of those beatings or situations where he had been shipwrecked and was not in the greatest of health, even though he gave of himself to give them the gospel. So that is my take on what he must he's probably talking about here. We do know also that Paul had this thorn in the flesh, some kind of disease that he prayed for, and Yah wouldn't heal him, and he was told by Yah that, my grace is sufficient for you. Paul had earned his curse, this curse that he was carrying in his flesh. He had earned it by persecuting the brethren, putting them to death, consenting, standing by, holding the coats of the men who stoned Stephen. Paul deserved what he got. Psalm 89:34, my covenant I will not break, nor alter the word that has gone out of my lips. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up. Comment down below. Comments of opposition are welcome. Just don't say anything dumb like we're not under the law, we're under grace, because you've been taught to use that verse outside of the bounds of its intended context. Subscribe now. Smash that subscribe button and ring that bell so that you get notifications of all future videos.